The diner reeked of burnt coffee and desperation, a scent Olivia had grown so accustomed to that it had seeped into her very skin. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow glow that made even the healthiest customers look jaundiced. Her feet throbbed in shoes held together more by hope than by the remaining stitches, the soles worn paper-thin from countless double shifts. The grease-stained apron tied around her waist felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Olivia wiped down table 7 for the 3rd time, her movements mechanical, hollow. This was her life now. Had been for 2 years, waking up in a cramped studio apartment in Chinatown, where the heating only worked when it felt like it, taking 2 buses to get here, smiling at people who looked right through her, then going home to count every meager tip, wondering if it would be enough to cover another day of her mother's hospital bills. 28 years old. The dream of becoming a nurse had died in her junior year of college, when the tuition money ran out, and her mother collapsed with a diagnosis that shattered everything. Now, Olivia Chen was just a ghost drifting through life, invisible to everyone. Rain had begun to fall outside, painting ribbons of light across the window glass whenever headlights swept past. The weather matched her mood perfectly gray, cold, relentless. She was refilling Mr. Henderson's cup, a 72-year-old widower who came in every night and always left exactly $1 no matter how long he stayed when the door opened. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Olivia felt it before she saw him. That shift in the atmosphere when someone dangerous enters a space. The kind of presence that makes every head turn, every half-finished conversation die mid-sentence. She looked up from Mr. Henderson's cup. Her breath caught in her throat. He stood in the doorway as if he owned not just the diner but the entire block. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than she made in a year. Even from across the room, she could see the perfect cut of the fabric, the way it moved with him like a second skin. Dark hair, slightly wavy, was swept back from his face, revealing sharp, angular features and a faded scar running along his left jaw. It didn't mar his appearance, only made him look more dangerous. His gray-blue eyes were cold as steel, cutting across the room like a blade. But it wasn't just his appearance that made her hands tremble around the coffee pot. It was everything else. The way 2 large men immediately flanked him, their eyes scanning the room with the cold professionalism of trained killers. The way he moved unhurried, deliberately slow like a predator who knew he sat at the top of the food chain. The way the air around him seemed to bend and crackle with something lethal yet magnetic. Mr. Ray, the 62-year-old Chinese owner, who had never bowed to anyone in 30 years of running this place in New York, actually straightened up behind the cash register. The sizzling from the kitchen fell silent. Even Mr. Henderson's perpetual hand tremor seemed to freeze. "Your usual booth, Mr. Valenti." Ray's voice carried a tone Olivia had never heard in 2 years of working here, reverent, almost subservient, with an undercurrent of pure fear. Valenti. Olivia didn't know much about New York's underworld, but she'd grown up in Chinatown long enough to know what that name meant. The most powerful Italian mafia family on the East Coast. Whispered stories of people who vanished without a trace, of an empire built on blood and bone. And the man standing in the doorway, Dominic Valenti, 37 years old, the boss of all bosses, had just walked into the rundown diner where she worked. That night, Olivia didn't know her life was about to change forever. She didn't know that in a few minutes, she would do the craziest thing in her 28 years of existence. And she certainly didn't know that the most dangerous man in New York would owe her a life. If you want to know what happened that night, the night a nameless waitress changed the fate of the city's most feared mafia boss, hit that like button to support the channel. Don't forget to share this story with friends who love drama, and subscribe with notifications on so you won't miss what happens next. Olivia drew a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She set the coffee pot down on the counter, wiped her hands on an apron stained with countless marks, then reached for the menu even though her instincts told her this man had not come here for the meatloaf special or the Tuesday chicken soup. Her feet carried her toward the far corner of the diner, where the best booth was always reserved for special guests. Now she understood why old Ray kept that table empty, no matter how crowded the place became. 2 large men had already taken up strategic positions. One watched the entrance, the other sat at a table across the way, his eyes sweeping over the entire restaurant. Their suit jackets bulged slightly on the left side of their chests, and Olivia did not need to be a genius to know what lay hidden beneath. She had seen guns before. Her ex-boyfriend used to keep one in his nightstand drawer, thinking it made him look tough. But there was something different about seeing weapons on men who truly knew how to use them. Men who carried firearms as naturally as breathing, not for show, but to be ready for anything. She stopped before Dominic Valenti's table, fighting to keep her voice from trembling. "Good evening, sir. May I start you off with something to drink?" She made the mistake of looking up. His gaze was waiting, as though he knew the exact moment she would lift her eyes. Those gray-blue eyes locked onto hers, and the world around them seemed to blur and fade. Olivia felt as if she were being seen through, not just her appearance, but everything she tried so hard to hide. The exhaustion, the despair, the nights spent crying alone in her darkened apartment, the phone calls from the hospital that made her heart stop every time her phone rang. He looked at her as though she were a puzzle waiting to be solved, an anomaly in a world he knew all too well. No one looked at Olivia that way. No one truly looked at her at all. "Coffee." His voice emerged deep and smooth as velvet, carrying a faint trace of Italian that had faded through years of living in America, yet still enough to send a shiver down her spine. "Black." She nodded, scribbling hastily in her notepad even though there was only one word to remember. Her hand shook so badly the letters came out crooked, like the handwriting of a 3-year-old child. She turned to leave, her heart pounding hard against her ribs, but his voice rose again and stopped her mid-step. "And for my associates as well." She turned back, trying not to meet his eyes directly this time. The silver-haired man at the opposite table gave a brief nod, his face expressionless as if carved from stone. Olivia hurried back to the counter, feeling as though she had just escaped from the den of a predator. Old Ray handed her the finest coffee pot they kept for special occasions, the kind regular customers never received. "Be careful now, child," he whispered, his voice tight with tension. "Do not spill it. Do not look him in the eye. Do not ask questions. Serve and leave. Understood?" Olivia nodded and carried the tray of coffee with the care of someone handling a bomb. She poured each cup with the precision that years of waitressing had taught her, though inside she was trembling. As she tilted the pot to pour for Dominic, a single drop of coffee fell onto the edge of the saucer. Her heart seemed to stop, but before panic could overtake her, her hand instinctively reached for the clean cloth tucked in her apron pocket, wiping away the stain with practiced grace. She looked up, ready to apologize, but found herself caught once more in his gaze. This time, something different flickered in those gray-blue eyes. Not the anger or irritation she had feared, but attention, a spark of curiosity that passed so quickly she almost thought she had imagined it. Dominic Valenti tilted his head slightly to one side, studying her as though he had glimpsed something unexpected. This girl was not so frightened that she lost control. She trembled, yes, but still performed her work flawlessly. She did not bow her head or avoid his gaze like everyone else in the diner, and in that instant, before Olivia even realized it, he had committed her face to memory, memorized those deep brown eyes that held quiet strength beneath their weariness, memorized the way she stood tall even as her shoulders carried the weight of the world. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Her voice came out calmer than she expected. Dominic shook his head, his lips curving into something too faint to be called a smile, yet no longer the cold mask of ice. "Not yet." She turned and walked away, feeling his gaze burning into her back the entire distance to the counter. She did not know that this was the first time in many long years that Dominic Valenti had truly noticed a woman, not for business, not as a threat, but simply because she made him curious. And the curiosity of a man like Dominic Valenti was never a simple thing. Olivia had just set the coffee pot down on the counter when old Ray signaled for her to make another round. She let out a sigh, lifted the pot, and turned back toward Dominic Valenti's booth. 15 minutes had passed since that powerful man walked through the door, and the air in the diner remained tight as a bowstring. The regulars had either slipped away quietly or sat frozen like statues, afraid to move. Only old Henderson remained in his usual spot, perhaps because he was too old to fear anything anymore, or simply because his hearing had gone so bad he had no idea what was happening around him. Olivia was about 3 steps from Dominic's table when the front door burst open. The sound cracked through the room like thunder on a rainy night. She turned instinctively, and everything before her eyes dissolved into chaos. 3 men rushed in, their faces covered with black cloth, guns in their hands. They moved fast and decisive, the kind of movement that comes from careful planning, from calculating every step in advance. One of them shouted in a hoarse voice, ordering everyone to get down on the floor. Screams erupted. Someone dropped a glass of water. The sound of shattering glass rang out. Old Ray collapsed behind the cash register, both hands clutching his head. The cook in the kitchen vanished through the back door. But Olivia did not move. She stood there frozen, the hot coffee pot still in her hands, right beside Dominic Valenti's booth. Her brain commanded her legs to run, but her body refused to obey. Dominic's 2 bodyguards reacted in an instant. They sprang to their feet, hands reaching for the guns hidden beneath their jackets. But the 3 gunmen were faster. At least 2 of them were. They aimed their weapons at the bodyguards, pinning them in place with those dark muzzles. And the 3rd gunman, a thin man, with wild eyes, was heading straight for Dominic. He circled around, approaching from behind, where Dominic could not see him. The gun in his hand rose, aimed directly at the back of the mafia boss's head. Time seemed to slow. Olivia watched it all unfold as if in some strange dream. She saw the assassin's finger tightening around the trigger. She saw Dominic sitting motionless, those gray-blue eyes cold as steel, staring straight ahead as though he had accepted his fate or was waiting for the right moment. She saw the silver-haired bodyguard trying to move but stopped by another gun barrel. And she saw herself, standing there with a pot of scalding coffee in her hands, less than a meter from the killer. Her mind did not think. There was no calculation or weighing of options, no heroic intention or noble purpose, only instinct. The most primal human instinct when witnessing a life about to be taken before your very eyes. The coffee pot in her hands suddenly felt heavy as lead, so hot she could feel the heat through the cloth padding. And in that moment, as the assassin's finger began to squeeze the trigger, Olivia Chen acted. She did not scream, did not warn anyone. She simply swung the coffee pot upward with all the strength her thin arms could gather, hurling it straight into the gaunt man's face. The dark, scalding liquid sprayed out like a wave, engulfing the killer's face. A scream tore through the air. The thin man staggered backward, both hands releasing the gun to clutch at his face, which was now steaming. The smell of coffee and burning flesh hit Olivia's nostrils, but the gun in his hand did not fall to the ground. It fired. The deafening gunshot rang out at the same moment. Pain ripped through Olivia's right shoulder. A blinding white light pierced through Olivia's heavy eyelids. She tried to open her eyes, but felt as though someone had poured lead into every muscle of her body. Everything was blurry, shimmering as if she were underwater. The steady beeping of a heart monitor reached her ears from somewhere far away. Where was she? What had happened? And then the memories crashed over her like a violent wave. The diner, the gunshots, the hot coffee pot, the assassin's burned face, the searing pain that tore through her right shoulder. Blood. So much blood, and those gray-blue eyes looking at her before darkness swallowed everything. Olivia jolted, fully awake, trying to sit up, but the sharp pain from her right shoulder sent her collapsing back onto the pillow with a groan. She raised her left hand to touch her shoulder and felt the thick bandages wrapped tightly around it. The wound throbbed with a dull ache, but no longer felt like it was being torn apart. Someone had operated and removed the bullet. She looked around, and her breath caught in her throat. This was not the public hospital where she always took her mother for checkups. There were no peeling walls, no noise from a crowded emergency room, no harsh smell of cheap disinfectant. This room was as large as her entire studio apartment. The walls were painted a soft cream color. Heavy velvet curtains hung at the windows. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. A flat-screen television was mounted on the wall, and on a leather sofa sat a woman whose sharp eyes were watching her closely. The woman appeared to be around 35 years old, with brown hair cut short and neat, a refined face that was beautiful but cold. She wore a perfectly tailored dark gray suit and sat with her legs crossed, carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to being in control of every situation. When she saw Olivia wake, she stood and walked to the bedside with decisive steps. "You are awake. Good." Her voice was deep and clear, not cold but not warm either. "I am Elena Rossi. Mr. Valenti asked me to be here when you woke up." Olivia tried to swallow, but her throat was dry as desert sand. Elena seemed to read her thoughts, pouring a glass of water from the pitcher on the nightstand and handing it to her. Olivia took a small sip, feeling the cool liquid soothe her burning throat. "Where am I?" "Mount Sinai Hospital, VIP room. You had surgery to remove the bullet from your shoulder 2 days ago. The doctor said the wound was not too serious, but you lost quite a bit of blood." 2 days. Olivia gasped, trying to sit up again despite the pain. 2 days. My mother. My job. I have to go. Elena placed her hand on Olivia's left shoulder, pressing gently but firmly enough to keep her lying down. "You are not going anywhere in this condition. As for your mother, she is fine. Mr. Valenti has taken care of it." Olivia froze. "Taken care of it? What does that mean?" Elena sat down on the edge of the bed, her brown eyes studying Olivia as though making an assessment. "Mr. Valenti had someone contact the hospital where your mother is being treated. Her medical bills have been paid. All of them, including the outstanding debts." Olivia's heart stopped for a beat. No. No, no, no. I did not ask for that. I do not want to owe anyone anything. That was not your decision to make. Elena spoke bluntly. You saved Mr. Valenti's life. In his world, that means he owes you. And Dominic Valenti is not the kind of man who accepts being in debt to anyone. Olivia felt her chest tighten. She did not want this. She had only acted on instinct, without thinking, without calculating. She did not save that man expecting anything in return. And now here she was, lying in a VIP hospital room, with a stranger telling her that the mafia boss had paid off all her mother's debts. This was all wrong. What about my job? Olivia asked, grasping for something normal. Old Ray. The diner. The diner is temporarily closed for repairs after the incident, Elena replied. Mr. Ray has been compensated for the damages. As for your job, do you really think you can work in this condition? Olivia closed her eyes, feeling like the world was spinning around her. Everything was spiraling out of control. She was just an ordinary waitress, invisible, unseen by anyone. How had she ended up here, in a VIP hospital room, with her life suddenly turned upside down by a man she had met only once? What does he want from me? She asked, her voice trembling. Elena stood, smoothing the wrinkles on her jacket. That is something you will have to ask him yourself. Mr. Valenti will come to see you soon. Elena had barely stepped out of the room for 10 minutes when the door opened again. Olivia did not need to look to know who was entering. She could feel the shift in the air, that familiar coldness spreading through the room as though someone had flung open a window in the dead of winter. Dominic Valenti walked in with slow, deliberate steps. He no longer wore the charcoal suit from that night. Instead, he had on a black dress shirt buttoned to the collar, perfectly tailored trousers, and a long, dark gray coat draped casually over his shoulders. Even in this relatively simple attire, he radiated a power that made the spacious VIP room suddenly feel small. Behind him, a large man stood guard outside the door. Not the silver-haired bodyguard Olivia had seen at the diner, but someone else, younger, with eyes cold as razor blades. Dominic gestured and the man closed the door, leaving him alone with Olivia in the room. She tried to sit up despite the sharp pain from her right shoulder. She did not want to lie flat on her back while facing this man. She needed anything that could help her feel less weak, less helpless. Dominic stopped beside the bed, his gray-blue eyes sweeping over her from head to toe. Lingering on the bandage wrapped around her right shoulder, something flickered in his gaze, too quick for Olivia to read, then vanished behind that familiar mask of indifference. How do you feel? His voice emerged deep and smooth as she remembered, but with something different, a softness she was not certain she had imagined. Olivia swallowed. I am alive. Thank you for asking, and thank you for taking care of the hospital bills, but I cannot accept it. I will find a way to pay it back. Dominic tilted his head slightly to one side, studying her as though observing some strange creature. You just saved my life and you want to pay back the hospital bills. I did not save you to be paid, Olivia replied, her voice harder than she intended. I only acted on instinct. I do not want to owe anyone anything, and I do not want to be involved in your world. My world, Dominic repeated, his lips curving into a faint line of irony. What do you know about my world? Enough to know I do not belong in it, Olivia answered. I am just a waitress at a diner. I have a mother who is seriously ill and needs care. I do not have time for anything else. So thank you for everything. But when I recover, I will leave here and return to my life. Dominic remained silent for a long moment, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers. Then he stepped closer, pulled the chair beside the bed, and sat down with the ease of a man accustomed to controlling every situation. When he settled into the seat, the distance between them narrowed until Olivia could smell the expensive cologne lingering on him, a warm, woody scent mixed with something spicy she could not name. Miss Chen, he spoke slowly, clearly, as though explaining something to a child. I am afraid things are not as simple as you think. The men who attacked me that night were not common thieves. They were assassins hired by an enemy of mine, a very dangerous enemy named Tony Marchetti. Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. What does that have to do with me? You are the one who ruined his assassination plan, Dominic answered bluntly. You threw coffee in the face of one of his men and saved my life. He knows your face, he knows where you work, and he knows you are the only flaw in his perfect plan. Do you think a man like Tony Marchetti will let you go after that? Olivia felt her chest tighten. Breathing became difficult. She wanted to say he was threatening her, that this was just a tactic to force her to comply, but looking into those gray-blue eyes, she saw no threat or manipulation. She saw the truth, naked and cold. "Then what do you want?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. Dominic leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his eyes never leaving her for a second. "You saved my life. In my world, that means I owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with money. From this moment on, you are under my protection." "I do not need your protection," Olivia protested, though her heart was pounding wildly. "You do not have a choice." Dominic stood, the softness in his voice disappearing, replaced by the cold authority of a mafia boss. "Tony Marchetti will not stop until he destroys me and anyone connected to me. You have accidentally become part of this war, and if you leave here without protection, you will be dead within a week." He paused, looking at her with unreadable eyes. "I will not allow that to happen. You risked your life for me. Now it is my turn to keep you alive, whether you want it or not." 3 days after her conversation with Dominic Valenti, Olivia was discharged from the hospital. She refused the luxury car Elena offered and called a taxi with the last of the money in her wallet. Her right shoulder still ached dully, but she did not care. She needed to leave this strange world. She needed to return to her familiar life, no matter how terrible it was. At least it was hers. The taxi stopped in front of an old building in Chinatown, where her studio apartment sat on the 5th floor with no elevator. Olivia climbed each step of the staircase with heavy feet, the pain from her shoulder spreading down her arm, forcing her to stop and rest several times. When she reached her apartment door, she froze. The door stood ajar. The lock had been broken open. Wood splintered around the bolt. Olivia's heart pounded as she pushed the door and stepped inside. Her tiny apartment had been torn apart. Clothes were scattered across the floor. Dresser drawers had been pulled out and dumped. Her thin mattress had been slashed open, white stuffing spilling out like the entrails of a gutted animal. Even the photographs of her and her mother that hung on the wall had been ripped down, their glass frames shattered. Olivia stood in the middle of the wreckage, her legs trembling. They had been here. They knew where she lived. Dominic's warning echoed in her head like an alarm bell. "You will be dead within a week." She swallowed, trying to steady herself. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was just petty thieves from the neighborhood. Chinatown was not the safest place. Everyone knew that. She bent down to pick up one of the photographs, wiping the broken glass from her mother's face in the image. Then she saw it. A white piece of paper lying on the windowsill, the only spot that had not been ransacked, as though someone had deliberately left it there for her to find. Just one line of scrawled handwriting. "Next time it will not just be the apartment." Olivia dropped the paper as if it had burned her. She backed out of the apartment, heart pounding wildly, then ran down the stairs despite the pain from her shoulder. She needed to get to the diner. She needed to talk to old Ray. Maybe he would tell her everything had returned to normal, that the diner had reopened, that she still had a job to go back to. But when she arrived, the diner remained closed. A wooden sign hung on the glass door with the words "closed indefinitely." Inside was dark, tables and chairs stacked on top of each other, as though old Ray had decided never to open again. Olivia knocked on the door, called out his name, but no one answered. A woman selling vegetables at the stall next door looked at her with a mix of curiosity and concern. "You looking for old Ray?" she asked. "He went back to China. Heard some people came looking for him asking about some waitress. He got scared out of his mind. He just locked the doors and left everything behind. Didn't even wait to sell it, left that same night." Olivia felt the ground collapse beneath her feet. Old Ray had fled. Because of her. Because of the people hunting her. She no longer had a job. She no longer had a safe place to return to. And they knew everything about her. Her mother. Olivia suddenly thought of her mother, and her entire body went cold. She hailed another taxi, though her wallet was empty, and shouted the address of the hospital where her mother was staying. Throughout the ride, she prayed, something she had not done since her father passed away 20 years ago. But when she reached the public hospital where her mother had been treated, she was told that Susan Chen had been transferred. Transferred where? Olivia asked, her voice nearly a scream. The nurse on duty looked at her with confusion. "A private medical facility. Memorial Sloan Kettering. Did you not know? Your family completed the transfer paperwork 2 days ago." Olivia stood there, her mind spinning. Memorial Sloan Kettering, one of the best cancer hospitals in America, a place where one night of treatment could cost more than her monthly salary. Someone had moved her mother there. Someone had paid for everything, and she knew exactly who that someone was. Dominic Valenti had not been making empty words when he declared she was under his protection. He had acted, quietly and decisively, the way he did everything. He had moved her mother to safety before Olivia even realized she needed it. She stood in the middle of the hospital lobby, helpless and angry, yet deep inside, a small part of her felt grateful. And that was what frightened her more than anything. The gleaming black car stopped before the towering iron gates at dusk. Olivia sat in the back seat, gazing through the window at the Valenti estate, feeling as though she were stepping into an entirely different world. She had called Elena after leaving the public hospital, admitting defeat in her choked silence. No lengthy explanation was needed. Elena simply gave her an address and said someone would come to pick her up. Now, as the iron gates slowly swung open, Olivia understood she was crossing a threshold from which she might never return. The estate sat atop a hill in the outskirts of New York, far from the noise of the city. The main building was constructed in the style of classical Italian architecture, with white stone columns, a red tile roof, and tall windows overlooking vast gardens. A marble fountain stood at the center of the courtyard, water trickling softly in the fading afternoon light. Roses bloomed in full glory along both sides of the stone-paved path. Everything was so beautiful it seemed unreal, like a photograph from a magazine for the ultra-wealthy, the kind Olivia sometimes flipped through while waiting in clinic lobbies. She stepped out of the car, her worn shoes making a discordant sound against the marble. Elena was already waiting at the entrance, still in that perfectly tailored dark gray suit, still wearing the expressionless face Olivia had come to recognize. "Follow me." The woman spoke briefly and turned to walk inside. The interior of the mansion was even more impressive than the exterior. The main hall was as large as the entire ground floor of the building where Olivia once lived. A crystal chandelier hung suspended from the high ceiling, casting shimmering light onto the granite floor below. A spiral staircase of oak led to the upper floors. Expensive oil paintings adorned the walls, and everywhere, large men in black suits stood guard, their eyes tracking her every step. Olivia felt as though she were walking into a museum, or perhaps a gilded prison. She had not yet decided which. Elena led her through a long corridor and stopped before a heavy wooden door, knocking twice. "Come in." That familiar voice sounded from within, and Olivia's heart tightened. The room was a library, or perhaps an office, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books. A desk of walnut wood sat at the center, and behind it, Dominic Valenti was seated, his gray-blue eyes lifting from a stack of papers as she entered. Elena closed the door, leaving Olivia alone with the mafia boss. "Miss Chen." Dominic rose and walked around the desk with slow, unhurried steps. "You have changed your mind." "I had no other choice," Olivia replied, her voice harder than she intended. "My apartment was ransacked. My job is gone, and you moved my mother without asking me. I did what was necessary to protect you and your family, so everything went according to your plan." Olivia stepped closer, anger overtaking fear. "You backed me into a corner so I would have to come here." Dominic looked at her for a long moment, neither denying nor confirming. Then he tilted his head to one side, something resembling respect flickering briefly in his eyes. "You are smarter than I thought. I am not your puppet," Olivia said, her voice trembling but steady. "If I stay here, there will be conditions." Dominic crossed his arms over his chest, leaning slightly against the edge of the desk. "I am listening. First, I am not a prisoner. I am free to come and go and visit my mother whenever I wish." Olivia raised one finger. "Second, I will not be a freeloader. I need some kind of work to do. Anything. And third, this is only temporary. When the threat is over, I will leave and you will not stop me." Dominic was silent for a moment, his gray-blue eyes studying her as though she were a complex equation waiting to be solved. Then he nodded slowly. "Agreed. You will have your own room in the east wing of the estate. Victor will take you to see your mother whenever you wish, but you must have someone accompany you. As for work," he paused, something like curiosity appearing in his eyes. "Elena tells me you once studied nursing." Olivia nodded cautiously. "I dropped out in my 3rd year. But you still remember what you learned." Dominic spoke. It was not a question, but a statement. "I have a library full of medical books. You may use it to continue studying on your own. And if you wish, I can arrange for you to complete your degree." Olivia froze. She had prepared herself for refusal, for lengthy negotiations, for unreasonable demands. She had not prepared for this. "Why?" she asked, her voice guarded. "Why are you doing all of this?" Dominic walked toward the window, gazing out at the garden sinking into darkness. "Because you saved my life," he said, his voice deep and distant. "And because for the first time in many years, someone did that without asking for anything in return." The first days in the Valenti mansion passed like a strange dream from which Olivia could not wake. The room they gave her was 5 times the size of her old studio apartment, with a king-size bed dressed in white silk sheets, a wardrobe of oak carved with intricate detail, and a balcony overlooking the rose garden. The private bathroom had a marble bathtub and gold-plated shower fixtures. Each morning, a housekeeper brought breakfast to her room on a silver tray, with perfectly cooked eggs, crisp toast, and fragrant coffee that Olivia knew for certain was nothing like the burnt brew at Old Ray's diner. But all that luxury only made her feel more suffocated. She did not belong here. She was the daughter of a construction worker who died in a workplace accident and an immigrant woman fighting cancer. She was accustomed to working 16 hours a day, to aching feet and a back screaming with exhaustion, to counting every penny to buy instant noodles for dinner. She did not know how to sit still and let others serve her. On the 3rd day, Olivia could bear it no longer. She found Elena in her office on the 1st floor, where the woman sat surrounded by stacks of paperwork and computer screens. "I need to do something," Olivia said directly, without circling around. "I cannot sit idle all day like this." Elena looked up, one eyebrow raised with skepticism. "You are Mr. Valenti's guest." "I am not a guest," Olivia replied. "I am someone running for her life who happened to be given a place to stay. There is a difference. Give me something to do. Cleaning, cooking, laundry, anything. I do not care." Elena studied her for a long moment with an unreadable gaze. Then she sighed and pushed a list across the desk. "The head gardener is complaining about the dead blooms on the rose bushes. Since you cannot lift anything heavy with that shoulder, you can help by deadheading the flowers and trimming the dry leaves. Just be careful." Olivia accepted that task as though it were gold. Each morning she rose early, dressed in the simplest clothes she could find in a closet full of expensive dresses someone had prepared for her, and went out to work in the garden. She moved slowly among the bushes, carefully snipping off withered roses and collecting fallen petals into a small basket. She was mindful not to strain her injured shoulder, focusing on the simple, repetitive rhythm of the task. At least when she could feel the sun on her face and the scent of earth on her hands, she felt like herself again, despite the dull ache lingering in her shoulder. You're safe, Olivia, I promise." Dominic released Olivia, handing her over to an anxious Elena, who rushed to her side. His expression instantly turned cold and merciless, devoid of any previous tenderness. He spun toward Victor, the chief of security, and gave a curt order. "Victor, with me, now." In the security room, Victor's face was grim as he presented his report. He had reviewed the system logs and found that the camera feed for the Northwest Garden had been disabled, just a short gap of 15 minutes, and the motion sensors were manually overridden. This required a high-level access code, not a technical glitch, Victor concluded. "We have a traitor." Dominic's jaw clenched, his eyes sharp and dangerous as he stared at the dark screen. He knew Tony Marchetti couldn't have breached that heavily guarded system on his own, so Dominic asserted, "He has an inside man. I want a list of every staff member on the clock tonight, anyone with high-level access. Pull all security system access logs immediately. We will skin him, and the rat who helped him." The household staff initially watched her with eyes full of curiosity, mixed with suspicion. They did not understand why someone personally protected by Mr. Valenti would want to do manual labor. But gradually, as they saw Olivia work hard without any trace of arrogance, they began to open up. They greeted her in the mornings. Sometimes they invited her for tea in the kitchen. They shared small stories about life in the mansion. Everything changed on the 7th day. Olivia was in the kitchen, helping the head cook Maria prepare lunch, when a scream rang out from the laundry room. She ran there and found Rosa, a young girl in charge of washing and ironing, clutching her right hand as blood streamed down. The knife used to cut binding cords had slipped and sliced deep into her palm. Rosa sobbed, blood dripping onto the floor in bright red drops. The other household staff stood around, panicked and unsure what to do. "Stand back," Olivia said, her voice calm and decisive. She had not spent 3 years studying nursing only to forget everything. She washed her hands quickly, grabbed a clean cloth from the drawer, and knelt beside Rosa. She took the girl's hand and examined the wound with a professionalism she thought she had lost long ago. The cut was deep, but had not hit an artery. It needed stitches, but was not life-threatening. "Someone get me the first aid kit," Olivia commanded, "and call a doctor." While waiting, she pressed the cloth firmly against the wound to stop the bleeding, gently reassuring Rosa with a soft voice. She guided the girl to breathe deeply, kept her calm, and did not take her eyes off the wound for a single second. When the Valenti family's private physician arrived, he nodded approvingly at how Olivia had handled the situation. "You did well," he said. "If the bleeding had not been stopped in time, this girl could have been in serious trouble." Olivia simply nodded and stepped back to let the doctor work. When she turned around, she found Elena standing at the doorway, having observed the entire incident with sharp eyes. But this time, the woman's gaze was no longer cold or distant. There was something new in it, a respect Olivia had never seen before. "What year were you in nursing school?" Elena asked. "Third year." Before I had to drop out, Elena was silent for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I will speak with Mr. Valenti. Perhaps we can arrange more suitable work for you." 10 days after moving into the Valenti mansion, Olivia was finally allowed to visit her mother. Victor, Dominic's head of security, personally drove her to Memorial Sloan Kettering on a late autumn afternoon. He was the large man with the angular face, a man of few words, with eyes sharp as razor blades. Olivia had seen him standing guard outside her hospital room the day she woke up. Throughout the drive, he said almost nothing, focusing only on the road and occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror to make sure no one was following. The hospital stood on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a modern building with gleaming glass walls and a lobby that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a medical facility. When Olivia stepped inside, she felt out of place among patients dressed in expensive clothes and family members wearing costly watches. She still wore her old sweater and faded jeans, the same clothes she had brought from her ransacked apartment. She had refused the dresses hanging in the wardrobe that someone had prepared for her at the mansion. Her mother's room was on the 8th floor, a spacious private suite with windows overlooking Central Park. Modern medical equipment lined the walls. Heart monitors blinked in steady rhythm. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. Susan Chen lay propped against the pillows, her gray hair nearly all gone from chemotherapy, her face gaunt, but her eyes still brightened when she saw her daughter walk through the door. "Olivia." Her voice was weak but warm. "My daughter." Olivia rushed to the bedside, took her mother's frail hand, and fought back tears. "Are you feeling all right, Mom? Are they treating you well?" "Very well, my child." Susan smiled, a tired but genuine smile. "I do not understand what is happening. Why am I here? This hospital is so expensive. Where did you get the money?" Olivia had prepared her answer throughout the drive. She could not tell her mother the truth. She could not say that her daughter was living in the mansion of a mafia boss because she had accidentally saved his life and was now being hunted by another criminal gang. That would kill her faster than the cancer. "I received a scholarship, Mom," Olivia lied, keeping her voice as steady as she could. "A charity organization that helps nursing students from difficult backgrounds. They pay for tuition and also help families. I am staying with a friend while I finish my degree." Susan looked at her daughter with the kind of eyes only mothers possess, eyes that could see through any lie, but she did not ask more. Perhaps she was too tired to question, or perhaps she understood that sometimes children need to keep their secrets. "I believe you," she said gently, giving Olivia's hand a soft squeeze. "As long as you are safe and happy, I am at peace." Olivia stayed with her mother for 2 hours, telling her cheerful stories she made up about school, about friends, about the bright future she was working toward. Each lie cut into her heart like a blade, but she swallowed them all for the peaceful smile on her mother's face. When Susan drifted off to sleep from the medication, Olivia quietly kissed her forehead and left the room. Victor was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting. He asked nothing when he saw her reddened eyes. He simply led her to the car in silence. On the way back, Olivia sat gazing out the window, the tall buildings of Manhattan passing by like scenes from a silent film. She was thinking about her mother, about the lies, about the life she never imagined would become hers, when Victor suddenly spoke. "Mr. Valenti is not the bad man people think he is." Olivia turned her head, surprised. This was the first time this man had initiated conversation with her in the past 10 days. Victor kept his eyes on the road ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel. He once had a younger sister. His voice was deep and distant. "Isabella. She died when she was only 10 years old." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened?" Victor was silent for a long moment, as though weighing whether to continue. Then he let out a sigh. "She was kidnapped. They demanded ransom. Mr. Valenti's father paid, but they killed her anyway. Mr. Valenti was only 16 years old at the time. He was the one who found his sister's body." Olivia could not speak. She simply sat there, imagining a 16-year-old boy finding his sister's corpse and understood why Dominic Valenti's gray-blue eyes were always cold as ice. From that day on, he swore he would never let anyone he cared about be harmed again. Victor said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror for the first time. You saved his life. In his world, that means you are someone he must protect at any cost, not because of debt, but because you showed him that there are still people willing to risk their lives for others, without asking for anything in return. 10 days after moving into the Valenti mansion, Olivia was finally allowed to visit her mother. Victor, Dominic's head of security, personally drove her to Memorial Sloan Kettering on a late autumn afternoon. He was the large man with the angular face, a man of few words, with eyes sharp as razor blades. Olivia had seen him standing guard outside her hospital room the day she woke up. Throughout the drive, he said almost nothing, focusing only on the road and occasionally glancing at the rearview mirror to make sure no one was following. The hospital stood on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, a modern building with gleaming glass walls and a lobby that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a medical facility. When Olivia stepped inside, she felt out of place among patients dressed in expensive clothes and family members wearing costly watches. She still wore her old sweater and faded jeans, the same clothes she had brought from her ransacked apartment. She had refused the dresses hanging in the wardrobe that someone had prepared for her at the mansion. Her mother's room was on the 8th floor, a spacious private suite with windows overlooking Central Park. Modern medical equipment lined the walls. Heart monitors blinked in steady rhythm. A vase of fresh flowers sat on the bedside table. Susan Chen lay propped against the pillows, her gray hair nearly all gone from chemotherapy, her face gaunt, but her eyes still brightened when she saw her daughter walk through the door. Olivia. Her voice was weak but warm. My daughter. Olivia rushed to the bedside, took her mother's frail hand, and fought back tears. Are you feeling all right, Mom? Are they treating you well? Very well, my child. Susan smiled, a tired but genuine smile. I do not understand what is happening. Why am I here? This hospital is so expensive. Where did you get the money? Olivia had prepared her answer throughout the drive. She could not tell her mother the truth. She could not say that her daughter was living in the mansion of a mafia boss because she had accidentally saved his life and was now being hunted by another criminal gang. That would kill her faster than the cancer. I received a scholarship, Mom, Olivia lied, keeping her voice as steady as she could. A charity organization that helps nursing students from difficult backgrounds. They pay for tuition and also help families. I am staying with a friend while I finish my degree. Susan looked at her daughter with the kind of eyes only mothers possess. Eyes that could see through any lie, but she did not ask more. Perhaps she was too tired to question, or perhaps she understood that sometimes children need to keep their secrets. I believe you, she said gently, giving Olivia's hand a soft squeeze. As long as you are safe and happy, I am at peace. Olivia stayed with her mother for 2 hours, telling her cheerful stories she made up about school, about friends, about the bright future she was working toward. Each lie cut into her heart like a blade, but she swallowed them all for the peaceful smile on her mother's face. When Susan drifted off to sleep from the medication, Olivia quietly kissed her forehead and left the room. Victor was waiting in the hallway, leaning against the wall with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting. He asked nothing when he saw her reddened eyes. He simply led her to the car in silence. On the way back, Olivia sat gazing out the window, the tall buildings of Manhattan passing by like scenes from a silent film. She was thinking about her mother, about the lies, about the life she never imagined would become hers, when Victor suddenly spoke. Mr. Valenti is not the bad man people think he is. Olivia turned her head, surprised. This was the first time this man had initiated conversation with her in the past 10 days. Victor kept his eyes on the road ahead, hands gripping the steering wheel. He once had a younger sister. His voice was deep and distant. Isabella. She died when she was only 10 years old. Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. What happened? Victor was silent for a long moment, as though weighing whether to continue. Then he let out a sigh. She was kidnapped. They demanded ransom. Mr. Valenti's father paid, but they killed her anyway. Mr. Valenti was only 16 years old at the time. He was the one who found his sister's body. Olivia could not speak. She simply sat there, imagining a 16-year-old boy finding his sister's corpse, and understood why Dominic Valenti's gray-blue eyes were always cold as ice. From that day on, he swore he would never let anyone he cared about be harmed again. Victor said, glancing at her through the rearview mirror for the first time. You saved his life. In his world, that means you are someone he must protect at any cost, not because of debt, but because you showed him that there are still people willing to risk their lives for others without asking for anything in return. That night, Dominic Valenti sat alone in the library, a third glass of whiskey in his hand, though he had not taken a single sip. The flames from the fireplace danced across the leather-bound books on the shelves, reflecting in those gray-blue eyes that stared into empty space. He knew Olivia had visited her mother today. He knew Victor had told her about Isabella, and he knew that the memories he had buried for 21 years were rising to the surface, like a corpse from the depths of a river. 21 years. Sometimes Dominic felt as though it had happened only yesterday. Isabella, his little sister. 10 years old, with curly black hair like their mother, and brown eyes that always sparkled with laughter. She was the only light in the Valenti household, where the darkness of the underworld covered everything like a layer of dust that could never be wiped clean. His father, Antonio Valenti, was the most powerful mafia boss in New York at that time. He loved Isabella in a way he never loved Dominic, because she was pure, innocent, untouched by the world he had built. But Dominic had been trained from childhood to become the heir. He had learned to hold a gun at 12 years old. He had watched his father deal with traitors at 14. He had not been pure for a long time before the tragedy struck. That day was an October afternoon. Golden leaves covered the streets of Brooklyn. Isabella was walking home from school, only 2 blocks away from the house. The bodyguard accompanying her was shot dead on the sidewalk. When Dominic came home from school that day, his mother was weeping in the living room and his father was smashing everything within reach. The kidnappers called, demanding $5 million in ransom. A large sum, but not impossible for the Valenti family. His father paid immediately. No negotiation, no conditions. He would do anything to get his daughter back. But 3 days later, instead of Isabella, they received a box. Dominic was the one who opened that box. No one stopped him in time. Inside was the floral dress Isabella had worn the day she was taken, still stained with dried blood. And a photograph that 21 years later still burned his retinas every time he closed his eyes. His sister, 10 years old, lying motionless on cold concrete, her brown eyes open wide, staring at the ceiling as if asking why. Dominic did not cry. He had not cried since that day. Something inside him died with Isabella, something soft, something warm, something that believed in the world. In its place, something else was born, hard as steel, cold as ice, ruthless as the world had been ruthless to his sister. His father found the kidnappers within a week. They were men from a small gang trying to challenge the power of the Valenti family. His father dealt with them, one by one, slowly and painfully. Dominic had asked to be there to watch. At only 16 years old, he stood and watched the men who killed his sister die in agony without flinching. And when the last one drew his final breath, Dominic knelt beside the body and made a vow. He swore he would never let anyone he cared about be harmed again. He swore he would become strong enough to protect everything that belonged to him. He swore he would turn the Valenti family into a power that no one would dare touch, no one would dare threaten, no one would dare cause pain. 12 years later, when his father was assassinated by a traitor within the organization, Dominic took control at the age of 28. He dealt with the traitor so ruthlessly that the entire underworld of New York shuddered, and from that day on, no one dared challenge his position. Dominic Valenti became a name people only dared whisper. The boss of all bosses, the man with no weakness, until a thin waitress from a diner, with resilient brown eyes, threw a pot of hot coffee into the face of the man trying to kill him, then took a bullet meant for him without asking for anything in return. Dominic raised the glass of whiskey to his lips and drained it in one swallow. She reminded him of Isabella, not because of her appearance, but because of that light in her eyes, the light he thought had been extinguished from his life 21 years ago. 2 weeks after Olivia moved into the mansion, Elena knocked on her door at 6 in the evening with unexpected news. Mr. Valenti would like you to join him for dinner. Olivia nearly dropped the medical textbook she was holding. For the past 2 weeks, she had hardly seen Dominic at all. He was like a ghost in his own home, appearing and vanishing without anyone noticing. Sometimes she saw the library lights burning until late at night. Sometimes she heard cars leaving the estate at midnight and returning at dawn, but he never sought her out, never summoned her, as if she were a guest whose existence he had forgotten. Now, suddenly, he wanted to dine with her. Olivia did not know whether to feel anxious or curious, perhaps both. She changed out of her old sweater into a simple white blouse she found in the closet, keeping her jeans and her hair in a plain ponytail. She had no intention of changing who she was just for dinner with a mafia boss. The dining room of the Valenti mansion was large enough to seat 30 people, with a long oak table stretching into the distance, and chairs upholstered in deep red velvet. But tonight, only 2 place settings were laid out, positioned at opposite ends of that long table. The distance between them must have been at least 5 meters. Dominic was already seated at one end when Olivia walked in. He wore a black dress shirt without a tie, the top 2 buttons undone. He looked less intimidating than usual, yet still radiated an unmistakable authority. Those gray-blue eyes lifted when she appeared, and she felt as though she were being scanned by a machine that could read her most hidden thoughts. "Miss Chen." He nodded toward the chair across from him. "Please sit." Olivia walked to her seat and realized that at this distance, they would have to shout to hear each other speak. She stood still for a moment. Then she did something that perhaps no one in this mansion would dare to do. She pulled out the chair, picked up her entire place setting, and walked the length of the long table to set everything down at the seat right beside Dominic. "I am not going to shout across the room to have a conversation," she said, her voice as calm as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Dominic watched her for a long moment, surprise flickering briefly in eyes that were usually devoid of expression. Then he did something Olivia had never witnessed before. His lips curved upward into a small smile. So small it was almost imperceptible, but a real smile nonetheless. "You are not afraid of me," he said, his voice carrying a note that sounded almost like curiosity. "I am afraid," Olivia admitted plainly as she sat down, "but I am not going to let fear decide how I behave." Dinner was served. Elegant Italian dishes that Olivia had never tasted before. They ate in silence for a while, a strange silence that was not heavy or uncomfortable as she had expected. Then Dominic set down his fork and looked at her. "I want to ask you a question," he said, "and I want an honest answer." Olivia nodded, bracing herself for anything. "Why did you save me?" The question rang out, simple yet heavy. Dominic leaned toward her, those gray-blue eyes locking onto hers as though searching for something. "You did not know who I was. You owed me nothing. You could have dropped to the floor like everyone else and no one would have blamed you. So why?" Olivia was silent for a moment, thinking about her answer. Not because she did not know, but because she was trying to find a way to express something she did not fully understand herself. "I did not think," she finally said, her voice slow and measured. "I saw the gun pointed at your head. I saw his finger on the trigger, and I knew that if I did nothing, a person would die right in front of me. I did not think about who you were, what you did, whether you deserved to be saved. I only thought that it was a human life, and I could do something." She paused, looking down at the food growing cold on her plate. "Maybe that was foolish. Maybe I should have let fate take its course. But I could not stand by and watch someone die without doing anything. I was not made that way." Dominic said nothing. He only looked at her with eyes she could not read. Then he reached for the bottle of wine to pour her a glass. At the same moment, Olivia reached for the water glass, and their fingers touched. Just a fleeting instant, skin against skin, warmth meeting warmth, but both of them froze as though struck by lightning. Olivia pulled her hand back as if burned, her heart racing wildly. She did not dare look up, did not dare face whatever might be showing in those gray-blue eyes. And Dominic, for the first time in 21 years, felt something other than coldness in his chest. 3 days after that dinner, darkness began to close in around the Valenti mansion. Olivia was sitting in the library reading at midnight when the alarm tore through the silence. The piercing sound echoed throughout the building. Red lights flashed frantically. Footsteps thundered through the hallway. She leaped to her feet, the book falling to the floor, her heart pounding in her chest. Before she could run to the door, Victor appeared, his face tense as a wire, a gun gripped tightly in his hand. "Stay in the room," he commanded, his voice stripped of its usual calm. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except me or Mr. Valenti." "Understood." Olivia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Victor disappeared into the darkness, and she did as he said, locking the library door and retreating to the far corner of the room, away from the windows. She sat there, arms wrapped around her knees, listening to the sounds outside, shouting, running, then a single sharp gunshot. After that came a silence more terrifying than any noise. 15 minutes passed like 15 years before there was a knock at the door. "Olivia." It was Dominic's voice, deep and strained. "Open the door." She rushed to unlock it and found him standing there, his white dress shirt stained with blood that was not his own. Those gray-blue eyes were dark, his jaw clenched tight, his entire body radiating a cold fury that made her step back. "Are you all right?" he asked, His voice clipped. "I am all right," Olivia answered, her voice trembling. "What happened?" Dominic did not answer immediately. He stepped into the library, closed the door behind him, then walked to the table and poured a glass of whiskey, draining it in one swallow. "An intruder," he finally said, setting the glass down with a sharp sound. He got past the fence, disabled the camera on the south corner, and almost made it into the main building. When my guards caught him, he bit down on a poison capsule hidden in his teeth before we could question him. Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn to ice. He was one of Tony Marchetti's men. Not a question. A statement. Dominic nodded, his eyes dark. He was carrying a photograph. He pulled a crumpled picture from his pocket and placed it on the table in front of Olivia. Her heart stopped. It was a photo of her, taken from a distance while she was watering plants in the mansion's garden. She had no idea anyone had been watching. "Marchetti knows you are here," Dominic said, his voice cold as ice, but with an undercurrent of seething anger. "He knows you are important to me, and he will not stop until he uses you to bring me down." Olivia did not know whether to focus on the threat before her or on the phrase "you are important to me" that Dominic had spoken as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. She swallowed, trying to stay calm. "So what do we do now?" Dominic repeated, looking at her with unreadable eyes. Then he sighed, and for the first time she saw weariness show clearly on his usually expressionless face. "I will double the number of guards. Install more cameras and motion sensors. You will not leave the main building without at least 2 people accompanying you. And I will find a way to end Tony Marchetti before he ends us." He paused, stepping closer to her, those gray-blue eyes looking straight into hers. "I will not let anyone hurt you," he said, his voice deep as a vow. "You saved my life. I will protect yours at any cost." And for the first time, Olivia believed he meant it. 1 week after the intrusion, Olivia could not sleep. She had tried reading, tried counting sheep, tried closing her eyes and breathing deeply, but nothing could chase away the image of that photograph taken of her in the garden without her knowing. Someone had been watching her. Someone was hunting her. And that someone was willing to die rather than reveal anything. The clock struck 2 in the morning when she decided to go down to the library for a new book. Perhaps reading something dull would help her feel drowsy. She wrapped a thin cardigan over her pajamas and walked barefoot down the stairs, through the darkness lit only by dim nightlights along the hallway. When she reached the library door, she noticed light seeping through the crack. Someone was inside. She pushed the door open, ready to turn away if it was one of the guards, but the sight before her made her stop cold. Dominic sat on the leather sofa before the unlit fireplace, surrounded by 3 bottles of whiskey, 2 of them empty. He was not wearing his usual suit, only a wrinkled white dress shirt with several buttons undone at the top. A half-finished glass of liquor dangled from his hand. Those gray-blue eyes were bloodshot and hazy, staring fixedly at a portrait on the wall of a little girl around 10 years old that Olivia had never noticed before. He was drunk. So drunk he did not realize she was standing at the door. Olivia thought about retreating, leaving him alone with whatever ghosts were haunting him tonight. But her feet would not move. There was something in the slumped posture of the most powerful man in New York that made her heart clench. He no longer looked like a mafia boss. He only looked like a man bearing a pain too deep to name. She stepped inside, deliberately letting her footsteps sound against the wooden floor. Dominic lifted his head, his eyes taking a moment to focus on her. "Olivia," his voice was hoarse, heavy with alcohol. "You are not sleeping." "I could not sleep," she replied, moving closer. "It seems you could not either." Dominic laughed bitterly, a sound without any joy. "I cannot sleep on this day. Never have, never will." "This day," Olivia repeated, sitting down at the other end of the sofa. "What day is today?" Dominic was silent for a long while, his eyes returning to the portrait. Then he spoke, his voice deep and distant, as though he were talking to himself more than to her. 21 years ago. The day they found Isabella. Olivia felt her breath catch in her chest. She had heard Victor mention Dominic's sister briefly, but he had never spoken to her about it himself. She did not know whether to remain silent or say something, so she simply sat there, waiting. She was 10 years old. Dominic continued, his eyes still fixed on the painting. Black hair, brown eyes, always laughing. She loved roses, loved to dance, loved making me read her fairy tales every night even though I was 16 and thought I was too old for such things. His voice trembled, and Olivia realized this was the first time she had seen a crack in the steel shell he had built around himself. They took her on her way home from school. He went on, the glass in his hand tilting, but he did not notice. My father paid the ransom. $5 million. He thought money could buy back anything, but they killed her anyway. They killed a 10-year-old child even after they got the money. He stopped, his jaw clenched tight. I was the one who opened the box they sent. I saw her dress soaked in blood before anyone could stop me. I was 16 years old, and from that day on, I was no longer myself. Olivia said nothing. She simply did what instinct told her to do. She moved closer and placed her hand over his, the hand gripping the whiskey glass so tightly. Dominic froze when he felt the warmth of her touch. He looked down at her small fingers resting on his hand, then lifted his gaze to meet hers, his eyes rimmed with red. You know what kind of man I am, he whispered. I have killed people. Many people. I have done things you cannot imagine. Why are you still sitting here? Because behind the man who did all those things, Olivia answered, her voice gentle, is a 16-year-old boy who found his sister's blood-stained dress, and that boy was never given permission to cry. Dominic looked at her as though she had spoken in a language he did not understand. Then, slowly, he turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. He said nothing more, did nothing more. They simply sat there, in the dim glow of the desk lamp, two hands holding tight, and Olivia felt every small tremor running through the man she had thought had no feelings at all. They sat like that until dawn broke, neither speaking another word. 1 week after that night in the library, everything between Olivia and Dominic had changed. Nothing was spoken aloud, but she could feel it. The way he looked at her when they crossed paths in the hallway, his gaze lingering longer than necessary. The way he asked about her through Elena every day, even though they lived in the same house. The way he appeared in the library on nights when she read late, saying nothing, simply sitting at the other end of the room, working through stacks of papers as though her presence was what he needed to focus. And Olivia noticed the change in herself as well. She began to wait for those chance moments. She began to listen for his footsteps in the hallway, to notice the warm, woody scent of his cologne whenever he passed by. She began to wonder what he was doing on nights when he did not appear, and hated herself for caring. This was dangerous. She knew that, but she could not stop. That night, Olivia could not sleep. She wandered out onto the balcony of her room, looking down at the garden bathed in pale moonlight. The cool autumn breeze caressed her skin, but she did not go back inside for another layer. There was something about the cold that made her feel more awake, more real, in a life that had become surreal since that fateful night in the diner. She did not hear footsteps, but she felt his presence, just like that first night in the diner. The shift in the air when Dominic Valenti entered a space. She turned and saw him standing at the balcony door, still in the black suit from the late meeting she knew he had just finished. Those gray-blue eyes looked at her under the moonlight with an emotion she dared not name. You are not sleeping, he said. Not a question. Neither are you, she replied. Dominic stepped onto the balcony and stood beside her, close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body but not close enough to touch. They both looked out at the garden in silence, and Olivia wondered why he had come, wondered why he said nothing, wondered why her heart was pounding wildly just from standing beside him. You should leave. Dominic suddenly spoke, his voice deep and distant. When all of this is over, you should leave and never look back. Olivia turned to look at him, confused. Why do you say that? Because I am not a good man, he answered, still staring straight ahead. Because my world will destroy you. Because you deserve to be happy and I do not know how to bring happiness to anyone. You do not know what I deserve, Olivia said, her voice harder than she intended, and you do not get to decide for me. Dominic turned to look at her, those gray-blue eyes burning in the moonlight. You do not understand, he said, his voice strained. Every day you stay here, it becomes harder to let you go. Every night I see you. I want things I have no right to want. You are breaking down every wall I have built over the past 21 years, and that terrifies me. Olivia stepped closer, lifting her face to look at him. What are you afraid of? Afraid of losing you, Dominic whispered, his hand rising, trembling fingers brushing gently against her cheek. Afraid that someone will use you to bring me down. Afraid that one day I will stand at your grave the way I stood at Isabella's. And I'm afraid that if that happens, I will have nothing left to live for. Olivia did not answer with words. She simply rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The first kiss was gentle as a whisper, more a question than a declaration. But Dominic answered with all the longing he had been holding back for weeks. His hands cradled her face, pulling her closer, kissing her as though she were air, and he was drowning, as though this were the first time and the last. Then abruptly, he released her, stepped back once, twice. His face had returned to that familiar mask of indifference, but those gray-blue eyes held a storm. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice cold as ice. "This should not have happened." Then he turned and walked away, leaving Olivia standing alone on the balcony, her lips still warm from the kiss, and her heart shattered into pieces. 3 days after the kiss on the balcony, Dominic disappeared. Not literally. He was still in the mansion, still holding meetings, still running his empire. But to Olivia, he had vanished completely. No more dinners together, no more late nights in the library, no more glances meeting in the hallway. Every time she entered a room, he found an excuse to leave. Every time she asked Elena about him, she received only the answer that Mr. Valenti is busy. Olivia tried not to let it affect her. She told herself he was right, that the kiss had been a mistake, that she should not develop feelings for the mafia boss who was sheltering her. But every night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, she could still feel the warmth of his lips, still remembered the way he had kissed her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, then walked away as though she were nothing at all, and that hurt more than she had imagined. On the 5th day, Olivia made a decision. She could not stay here any longer. She could not live in the same house as the man who had kissed her and then treated her like air. She could not keep waiting for something that clearly would never happen. She could protect herself. She had lived 28 years without anyone shielding her. She would find a way, leave New York if necessary, start over somewhere else. Anything would be better than this feeling. The feeling of being trapped in a gilded cage and rejected by the very man who had locked her inside. She spent the entire day observing the guard schedules, memorizing shift changes, identifying blind spots in the camera system she had accidentally discovered over the past weeks. She took nothing except the small amount of money Elena had given her for pocket expenses and a few of the simplest clothes. She left no farewell letter because she did not know what to say. At 11 at night, when the mansion had fallen into silence, Olivia climbed through her bedroom window on the 2nd floor. Her balcony connected to a lower awning, from which she could drop into the back garden without being recorded by cameras. She had calculated carefully, prepared for everything, except one thing. The moment her feet touched the damp grass, a hand clamped over her mouth from behind. Olivia tried to scream, tried to struggle, but a sweet chemical smell flooded her nostrils. Chloroform. She recognized it immediately from what she had learned in nursing school. She tried to hold her breath, tried to resist, but the hand over her mouth was too tight and her body too small compared to her attacker. The world began to spin. Darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. Before losing consciousness completely, she caught sight of 2 other figures dragging an unconscious guard into the bushes, and a face leaning down to look at her with a triumphant smile. The face of a man around 45 years old with cruel eyes and a scar running from his temple down to his cheek. "Hello, Miss Chen." His voice reached her as though from very far away. "I am Tony Marchetti. We have much to discuss." Then darkness swallowed her. When Olivia woke, she did not know how long she had been unconscious. She only knew she was lying on cold concrete, her hands bound behind her back with rough rope that cut into her skin, and her entire body aching as though she had been beaten. The room around her was dark and damp, looking like an abandoned warehouse with blacked-out windows. The only light came from an old ceiling bulb dangling from a wire. And sitting in a chair across from her, legs crossed casually, was Tony Marchetti. "You are awake," he said, a cruel smile spreading across his lips. "Good. I hate waiting." Olivia struggled to sit up, her body shaking from cold and fear, but she did not let the fear show on her face. She had survived too much to crumble before someone like him. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice hoarse but steady. Tony tilted his head to one side, watching her the way a cat watches a mouse it is about to torment to death. "I want Dominic Valenti, and you, poor little girl, will be the perfect bait to bring him to me." Time became meaningless in the darkness of the warehouse. Olivia did not know how long she had been there. She only knew that hunger was gnawing at her stomach, and thirst had made her throat feel like sandpaper. Tony Marchetti was in no hurry. He had all the time in the world, and he wanted to savor every moment. In the first hours, he simply sat there, watching her with the eyes of someone who delighted in his prey's fear. He told her about the war between himself and Dominic, about how the Valenti family had stolen his territory, about the years he had spent hiding in the shadows, waiting for his chance at revenge. He spoke of Dominic as though speaking of a mortal enemy, with burning hatred in every word. Then he began to ask questions. Where did Valenti keep her in the mansion? How many guards were on duty? What was his daily schedule? What were his weaknesses? Olivia did not answer. Not because she was loyal to Dominic, but because she knew that no matter what she said, Tony would not spare her, and she would rather die than become a tool to kill the man who had saved her mother's life, who had given her shelter when she had nothing, who had kissed her as though she were his whole world. Tony did not like her silence. The first slap came without warning, so hard that Olivia's head snapped to the side and her ears rang for several seconds. She tasted blood in her mouth, but she did not cry, did not beg. She only lifted her head and looked straight into his eyes with all the defiance she could muster. That only made Tony angrier. The next punch landed in her stomach, doubling her over and leaving her coughing and gasping, then a kick to her ribs, then another. Olivia lost count. She only knew the pain came in relentless waves crashing against her body, each one stronger than the last. But she did not open her mouth. She thought of her mother, of that gaunt face still smiling in the hospital. She thought of the years spent struggling to survive, of the nights she went hungry but still woke up to go to work the next morning. She had survived all of that. She would survive this too. After a time Olivia could not measure, Tony stopped. He stood panting, sweat dripping from his forehead, but his eyes still burned with madness. "You are stubborn," he said, his voice mixing anger with something that sounded like reluctant admiration. "I understand why Valenti keeps you close." He turned and signaled to a henchman standing in the corner of the room. "Give me the phone. Record this." Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn to ice when she saw the phone raised, the camera lens pointed directly at her. She knew what was about to happen. Tony would send this video to Dominic. He would use images of her beaten and humiliated to lure Dominic into a trap. And Dominic, the man who had sworn to protect her, the man who was trying to push her away because he was afraid of losing her, would come. She knew he would come. And that was exactly what Tony wanted. "Hello, Dominic." Tony spoke into the camera, that cruel smile on his lips. "I have a little gift for you." He stepped aside, revealing Olivia sitting on the concrete floor, hands bound behind her back, face bruised and swollen, dried blood at the corner of her mouth. But her eyes were still open, still looking straight at the camera with unwavering resilience. "Your girl is quite stubborn," Tony continued. "She would not say anything about you. Admirable, really. But I wonder how long she can stay silent." He bent down and grabbed Olivia's hair, yanking her head back. "Say something," he commanded. "Beg your lover to come save you." Olivia looked straight into the camera, and instead of begging, she spoke words she knew might get her killed. "Do not come," she said, her voice hoarse but clear. "This is a trap. Do not come for me." Tony's next punch struck her face so hard she collapsed onto the floor. But before darkness swallowed her again, Olivia managed to smile. She had done it. She had warned him. Dominic was sitting in his office reviewing security reports when his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number containing only a video link. He should not open it. He knew that, but instinct was screaming inside him. And when he clicked the link, his world collapsed. Olivia's face appeared on the screen, bruised, swollen, dried blood at the corner of her mouth, hands bound behind her back, sitting on cold concrete like a caged animal. And Tony Marchetti's voice rang out, dripping with triumph and cruelty. Dominic watched the video as though hypnotized, his body frozen, but inside a storm was raging. He watched Tony strike her, watched her fall, watched her lift her head with eyes still defiant through it all. Then he heard her voice, hoarse but clear through the phone speaker. "Do not come. This is a trap. Do not come for me." Tony's next punch sent her crashing to the floor, and the video ended. Dominic did not know how long he sat motionless, staring at the black screen. Maybe seconds, maybe minutes. Then the fury crashed over him like a tidal wave. He shot to his feet and swept everything off his desk. Papers flew everywhere. The whiskey glass shattered. The laptop screen slammed against the wall with a crash. He overturned the chair, punched the wall until his knuckles bled, let out a wordless roar, containing all the rage, fear, and despair he had suppressed for 21 years. Victor and Marco burst into the room when they heard the noise, and they froze at the sight before them. The most powerful mafia boss in New York, the man who had never lost his composure in front of anyone, stood amid the wreckage with bloodshot eyes and ragged breath like a wounded beast. "Find her," Dominic said, his voice cold as ice yet trembling with the fury boiling within. "Mobilize everyone, every informant, every contact. I want to know where Tony Marchetti is hiding her within 24 hours. Marco stepped forward, picked up the phone from the floor, and watched the video. His face hardened, his jaw clenched tight. "She told you not to come," he said. "She knew it was a trap." I know it is a trap, Dominic replied, his voice cold as steel, and I do not care. Tony wants me to come. I will come. But not the way he expects. I will find him before he has time to prepare. I will kill every last one of them, and I will bring her back. He paused, those gray-blue eyes burning with an intensity no one in that room had ever witnessed before. She told me not to come for her, he said, his voice breaking. She is being tortured, and the first thing she thinks about is protecting me. The last time someone did that for me was 21 years ago, and I could not save that person. He looked at Victor and Marco, his gaze filled with absolute determination. This time will be different. Find her, at any cost. 36 hours. That was the longest span of time in Dominic Valenti's life. Longer even than the night he waited for news of Isabella 21 years ago. 36 hours without sleep, without food, only endless phone calls, ruthless interrogations, and fear gnawing at him every second. The entire Valenti empire was mobilized. Every informant, every eye, every ear on the streets of New York, focused on a single objective, finding where Tony Marchetti was hiding Olivia. And finally, a small-time drug dealer in Brooklyn broke after Victor interrogated him for 4 hours. An abandoned warehouse in the industrial district south of the city, a place Tony had used as a transit point for contraband before Dominic took over his territory. Dominic did not wait another moment. He led the assault team of 20 men, armed with heavy weapons and body armor. Victor tried to persuade him to stay back, to let others handle it, but Dominic would not listen. He would bring her back himself. He would not let anyone else do it. The warehouse sat at the end of a deserted dirt road, guarded by roughly 10 of Tony's gunmen. They did not stand a chance. Dominic's team attacked swiftly and precisely, like a machine programmed to perfection. Gunfire erupted in the night, tearing through the silence of the abandoned industrial zone. 1 man fell, then 2, then 3. Dominic moved like a ghost, the gun in his hand, taking down anyone who stood in his way. He did not think, did not hesitate. Only one purpose existed in his mind, reaching Olivia before it was too late. He kicked open the warehouse door and stepped into the darkness within. The smell of mold, blood, and fear flooded his nostrils. Weak light from the old ceiling bulb shone down on a figure lying motionless on the concrete floor. Olivia. He ran to her side, dropped to his knees, his heart nearly stopping when he saw her condition. Her face was bruised beyond recognition, lips cracked and caked with dried blood, clothes torn, her thin body trembling from cold and pain, but she was still breathing. He could see her chest rising and falling slightly, and that was the only thing keeping him from collapsing on the spot. Olivia, he whispered, his trembling hand gently touching her bruised cheek. Olivia, I am here. I came. Her eyes opened, slowly and painfully. It took a moment for her to focus on the face leaning over her, and when she recognized who it was, her dark brown eyes filled with tears. I told you not to come, she whispered, her voice hoarse. This is a trap, and I do not care. Dominic answered, his voice breaking. He carefully untied the rope binding her hands, gentle as though she were something precious and fragile. Then he lifted her up, cradled her in his arms, and for the first time in 21 years, Dominic Valenti wept. I am sorry, he whispered into her hair, his voice shaking. I am sorry for pushing you away. I am sorry for saying that kiss was a mistake. I am sorry for failing to protect you. I am sorry. I am sorry. Olivia said nothing. She simply rested her head against his chest and cried. The tears she had held back for 36 hours finally poured out, mingling with his. Gunfire still echoed somewhere outside, but Dominic did not care. He knew Victor and Marco would handle it. He knew Tony Marchetti would pay for what he had done. But right now, the only thing that mattered was the woman in his arms. She was alive. She was here, and he would never let anyone hurt her again. He carried her out, stepping over the bodies of Tony's men without a glance. Victor was waiting with the car, the back door already open. He placed Olivia in the back seat and sat beside her, still holding her tightly in his arms as though afraid that if he let go, she would vanish. Take us home, he commanded. Call the doctor immediately. And Victor. He paused, his voice cold as ice. Find Tony Marchetti. I want him alive when I arrive. The car sped off into the night, and Dominic sat there, holding Olivia in his embrace, feeling her warmth, the beat of her heart, and swore he would never let her leave his side again. 1 week passed since the night of the rescue. Olivia lay in her room at the Valenti mansion, cared for by a private physician and a nursing team on duty around the clock. The bruises on her face had faded from purple-black to greenish-yellow, a sign that her body was slowly healing. Her cracked ribs hurt less now, and she could sit up without help, but the wounds inside her would take longer to mend. Dominic stayed by her side every day, not the distant kind of presence, observing through Elena's reports as before, but truly by her side, sitting next to her bed for hours, reading to her when she could not sleep, coaxing her to eat spoonful by spoonful when she had no appetite. He did not say much, but his presence was what she needed, more than any words. On the 7th night, Olivia woke at 2 a.m. from a nightmare. She dreamed she was locked in that dark warehouse again, Tony Marchetti's laughter echoing through the shadows, and no one came to save her. She sat up with a jolt, breath ragged, cold sweat soaking her back, and realized Dominic was sitting in the chair beside her bed, those gray-blue eyes watching her in the darkness. "What did you dream about?" he asked, his voice deep and gentle. Olivia did not answer. She only looked at him with eyes still clouded by fear from the nightmare. Dominic stood, sat down on the edge of the bed, and gently pulled her into his arms. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and gradually, the trembling in her body subsided. They sat like that for a long while, in silence broken only by the night wind outside the window. Then Dominic spoke, his voice hoarse as though what he was about to say had been trapped in his throat for too long. "I have dealt with Tony Marchetti," he said. "He will never hurt you or anyone else again." Olivia did not ask for details. She did not need to know. She simply nodded, accepting that information as a simple fact of life. "The night I received that video," Dominic continued, his voice trembling, "I thought I would lose my mind. I destroyed my entire office. I roared like an animal. And I realized something I had been trying to deny since that night on the balcony." He paused, lifting her chin so he could look into her eyes. In the moonlight filtering through the curtains, his gray-blue eyes shimmered with an intensity she had never seen before. "I love you, Olivia," he said, each word clear as a vow. "I love you so much it terrifies me. I tried to push you away because I thought that was the best way to protect you. But I was wrong. I cannot live without you. I do not want to live without you." Olivia looked at him, the most powerful man in New York. The mafia boss the entire city feared, kneeling before her with his heart laid open like a book. She remembered the first time she saw him walk into the diner, cold and distant as a god from another world. She remembered that night in the library when he told her about Isabella, the first time she saw a crack in his armor of steel. She remembered the kiss on the balcony, brief yet burning everything within her. "I do not love your work," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I do not love your empire or your wealth. I love the man who reads books until 3 a.m, the man who still weeps for his sister after 21 years, the man who charged into enemy territory to save a waitress nobody knew existed." She placed her hand on his cheek, feeling the warm skin beneath her palm. "I know who you are. I know what you have done. And I choose you." Dominic closed his eyes, as though her words were something he had waited his whole life to hear but never dared believe he would. Then he kissed her. Not a hurried, desperate kiss like that night on the balcony, but a slow, deep kiss, holding all the words of love he did not know how to speak aloud. Olivia answered him, wrapping her arms around his neck, pulling him down beside her. And that night, in a room bathed in moonlight, they found each other in a way neither had thought possible. There was no rush, no hesitation, only two lonely souls finally finding their harbor. Dominic loved her as though she were the most precious thing in the world, gentle yet passionate, careful yet consuming, and Olivia answered with all the love she had tried to deny for weeks. When dawn broke outside the window, they lay in each other's arms, fingers intertwined, as though never wanting to let go. "I will never let anyone hurt you again," Dominic whispered into her hair. "Never." Olivia smiled, the first smile since she had been rescued. "I know," she answered. "I believe you." 6 months after that fateful night, Olivia stood before the mirror in a pristine white wedding gown, gazing at her reflection in disbelief. The girl in the mirror was no longer the gaunt, exhausted waitress with lifeless eyes. She was a woman in love and loved in return, her eyes bright with happiness, a smile she could not hide playing on her lips. Elena stepped into the room, and for the first time, Olivia saw tears fall from that sharp woman's eyes. "You are beautiful," Elena said, her voice choked with emotion. "He is a lucky man." The wedding was held in the garden of the Valenti estate, beneath an arch of white roses that Olivia had tended with her own hands for months. Only the closest circle attended, around 50 people. But for Olivia, that was all she needed. Her mother sat in the front row in a wheelchair, frail but with eyes shining as she watched her daughter walk down the aisle. Susan had wept when Olivia told her the truth about Dominic, about his world, about everything that had happened. But then she had taken her daughter's hand and said she believed in Olivia's choice. She had seen the way Dominic looked at her daughter and knew it was true love. Dominic stood waiting at the end of the path in a perfectly tailored black suit, his gray-blue eyes never leaving her for a second. And when she stood before him, when they exchanged rings and spoke their vows, Olivia knew she had found her home. Not this lavish mansion, not the wealth or the power, but the arms of the man standing before her, the man who had seen her when the whole world looked right through her, the man who loved her with all her scars and shadows. 3 months after the wedding, Olivia's mother passed away peacefully in her sleep at the hospital. She departed with a smile on her lips, after witnessing her daughter find happiness. Olivia wept for many days. The pain of losing her mother felt like a bottomless abyss, but Dominic was beside her every moment, holding her when she cried, sitting in silence when she needed stillness, reminding her to eat when she forgot herself. He did not try to cheer her up or speak hollow words about time healing all wounds. He simply stood there, steady as a rock, so she would know that even if the world collapsed, she still had somewhere to lean. The last thing her mother said to Olivia before she passed was to live happily and give her many grandchildren. 1 year later, Olivia kept that promise. She discovered she was pregnant on a spring morning, and when she told Dominic, the man who had once killed without blinking wept like a child. 9 months later, Sofia Isabella Valenti was born, a healthy baby girl with her father's black hair and her mother's brown eyes. Dominic held his daughter for the first time with trembling hands, looking at the tiny being in his arms as though beholding a miracle. They gave her the middle name of Dominic's sister, so that Isabella would live on in the family's memory, not as a wound, but as an angel watching over them from above. 3 years after the night Olivia took a bullet in old Ray's diner, she sat in the garden of the Valenti estate, her hand resting on the growing curve of her belly where their second child was growing. She watched Dominic pushing Sofia on the swing, the sound of their daughter's laughter ringing through the afternoon sunlight like crystal bells. Dominic had changed greatly over those 3 years. He was still the powerful boss of the Valenti empire, but he had gradually shifted the business operations toward legitimate ventures, not because he was afraid or weak, but because he wanted to build a future his daughter could be proud of. He wanted to be present for every important moment of Sofia's life, to take her to school on her first day, to intimidate any boy who dared court his daughter, to walk her down the flower-lined aisle on her wedding day. And he could not do those things if he was sitting in prison or lying in a coffin. "Daddy, higher," Sofia called out, her black hair flying in the wind. Dominic laughed, the kind of laugh only this small family ever witnessed. He pushed the swing a little higher. Then he caught Olivia's gaze from across the garden, and his smile softened into something deep and private. He walked over to her, sat down beside her chair, and placed a hand on her belly. "Our son is kicking," Olivia said, smiling. Dominic leaned down to kiss her belly, then lifted his face to kiss her lips. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving my life, for giving me a family, for loving me even knowing who I am." Olivia stroked his hair, looking into the gray-blue eyes she had come to love without knowing when it began. "You saved me first," she answered. "You showed me that I deserved to be loved, that I was not invisible, that life could still be beautiful after weathering so many storms. We saved each other," Dominic said, pulling her into his arms. "And I will continue to protect you, to protect this family, until my last breath." Sofia came running over and climbed into her father's lap, and the whole family sat there in the sunset light. 3 generations of love and hope. Olivia looked at the faded scar on her shoulder, the scar from the bullet that fateful night, and smiled. The scar would never completely disappear, but she did not want it to. It was a reminder of the night everything changed, the night she risked her life for a stranger, and that stranger kept his promise to protect her forever. This was their story. Not perfect, not simple, but completely their own. This story teaches us that love can blossom in the most unexpected places, that kindness and courage are always rewarded, and that none of us are truly invisible. We only need one person willing to see us. It also reminds us that a painful past does not define our future, and that people are always capable of change when they find a reason big enough to change for. If you feel this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell so you never miss our daily videos. Like and share this video to spread these beautiful messages to more people. We would love to know how you felt about this story. Have you ever experienced a moment when a small act of yours changed someone's life, Or has someone appeared and changed your life in ways you never expected? Please share your story in the comments below. We always want to hear what comes from deep within your hearts. Thank you for watching until the very end. We wish all of you good health, a joyful life, and peace every day. Always believe that good things will come to those who love and never stop hoping. Goodbye, and we will see you in the next video.